Great taste. Sweet. Sour. So good to taste.
Welcome to Great Taste. I'm your host, Steve Boss. I am thrilled to have as my guest on this show, Katie Quinn, the author of 2 books, Avocados, and the book we're going to discuss, Cheese, Wine, and Bread, Discovering the Magic of Fermentation in England, Italy, and France. Now, Katie, before I let you say hi, I'm just going to say that in addition to her adventures in England, Italy, and France, the book includes numerous mouthwatering recipes, including the recipe and story of her mother's challah bread and pub mac and cheese. The stories of all the mentors who helped guide her through the different processes were particularly inspiring. She posts regularly on Instagram. Her highly entertaining and informative Cute Katie YouTube channel has over 300 videos, and she hosts the Keep It Quirky podcast. Whew. She and her husband, Connor, recently moved to Puglia in southeastern Italy, and some of her more recent videos cover how to do coffee in Italy, 9 culture shocks of living in Italy, reacting to Italian game shows, I love that one, and how to be more Italian in Italy. Oh, by the way, did I mention she speaks Italian, French, British, English? Oh, Katie, hi.
That was so fantastic. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for having me. That was probably the best intro I've ever had. Thank you. I love that you give me credit for British English. I appreciate that.
Well, that's really fun, you know, if anybody doesn't know what we're talking about, they should look it up because it's really very interesting. Anyway, hey, would you start out, because I want you to just set the scene a little bit by reading just a short passage from your introduction, if you don't mind.
Happily. I looked at the spread on my table and blinked as I reached for an uncapped pen that sat on the countertop. I drew a diagram in the margin of the book, a triangle pointing down. I labeled each corner according to what I saw in front of me. Cheese in one, wine in another, and bread at the apex, facing where I sat. Cheese, wine, and bread. That's it.
Yeah, that basically is it, by the way.
Yeah. The triptych of life. Yeah.
Right. Hey, I'm gonna just throw out 2 other little passages because there were so many that stood out to me, but obviously we don't have time for me to just sit here and read your book to all of our listeners who probably would be like, okay, we'll get it. We'll buy the book. All right.
That would be like old-fashioned radio, old-fashioned radio stories. I'm in for that.
Hey, I'm old enough for old-fashioned radio, so it's okay. So let me just read 2 little insightful gems that I loved in the book. They're very different. When describing clabbered or cultured milk, that's when milk ferments like buttermilk or yogurt, you write, while cheese is proof of human inventiveness, I see these products as evidence of how we can carry on through the awkward transitions in life. Who thought this slush could be delicious? Sure, it may not be the elevated art of cheese, but these clabbered cousins offer this advice: make it work. I was a big walking clabbered human my first year in England. By the way, we'll get to that. And you know what? I made it work, but I am glad I continue to ferment. I love that. That was awesome.
Thank you for reading that one. Thank you.
And here's the second one. This one's about family. In writing about your Uncle Jimmy, this is what you wrote. His external toughness was how he survived. Oh my, I'm gonna tear up here. But his kind-hearted ability to make every soul around him shine has become his legacy. It was in his nature to power through life as a bully man. But if you lifted the lid a bit, you'd find an aura of unconditional acceptance. My dad tells the story of how Uncle Jimmy unequivocally welcomed him into the family, saying, if you're good enough for our Susie, you're good enough for us, and giving him a big hug. After he passed away, a few years following that breezy day when he visited us in Southeast Ohio, I remember his children, Danny and Patty, would wrap me in what felt like Uncle Jimmy's, in a hug that felt like Uncle Jimmy lived through them. Even when I grew up, they lifted on their tiptoes to give me kisses on the cheek, opening their arms wide as the timeless symbol of welcome and love. It's the whole story of this book. I mean, it's family, which is all part of it. It's the families that you became a part of in your adventures. And it's the story of the transitions that take place in the transformations of not only us personally, but the elements, food, wine, and bread. Cheese, wine, and bread, sorry. And so
you've completely hit the nail on the head, Steve. And I'm so grateful. I'm appreciative for you that you found the book to be exactly what it is. And it's really interesting as I've really just started doing all this promotion for the book. Like, I'm so excited about it. And, I'm so proud of the book. So I want to talk about it in any way anyone wants to talk about it. And I actually just finished doing a recipe demo of my cheddar brownies recipe. And that was so fun. But in that way, the people who were a part of that virtual recipe demo, they might walk away thinking that this is a cookbook. And yes, it has recipes sprinkled throughout, which I love these recipes and I hope everyone makes them and has dinner parties with them, but it's so much more than a cookbook. And so I'm just thrilled that you see that and that you want to talk about it, because, that's the part of it that really, that's the passion point for me. Yeah.
Well, I think that the reason that message comes through is because you're willing to be vulnerable, you're willing to be open, you're willing to tell us your story. So if you didn't do that, if you didn't share with us, that message wouldn't come through, but it comes through just very clearly. So, hey, how about let's look into your personal story, because not all of us have seminal moments in our lives, one or more particular events that shape what becomes our future, but you did. And can you share with us what happened that changed the trajectory of your life?
Yes. I was in a really bad ski accident, traumatic brain injury. My head hit a block of ice very, very hard. And then I tumbled like a rag doll into a ditch and was unconscious for a little while they whisked me down the slopes. And I spent about a week in the intensive care unit in the hospital. And we weren't sure that I would, I'm so grateful. Traumatic brain injuries are I could write a whole book about that. And books have been written about that. It's not a given that someone will recover fully from a TBI. I am so thankful I did. So I'm able to talk about this from a place of so strangely seeing how that accident, because then what happened, I was 27 years old when that happened, living in New York City, living my best life. I was like, at least felt like I was just killing it in the career world. Like I was really feeling like I was on top of the world. And then my world came to a complete halt. I moved back in with my parents. I went to physical therapy to relearn how to walk, because that is the part of my brain that was hit. It affected my vestibular system, which is the body's balance center, and really relearning how to put one foot in front of the next. And it was that time where everything had to quiet down and slow down. The complete opposite of my New York City life in my 20s, right? This is not to get too ahead of myself, but this is why I had to include some of the personal vulnerable elements in this book, because to me, like, life is one big fermentation, and food and love and, everything that this life is about, it's all so tied together. And so when I went to write this book, I didn't know that I would be so vulnerable as you said, and include so much of kind of, the memoir-esque through line of the book, like the narrative that ties it all together and really the umbrella of the book. I didn't know I would do that, but like, I didn't know I would share about the ski accident in the introduction, but it became so obvious as I was writing that like food, life, love, fermentation, all of these things, I was just like, yo, I have to share what's going on in my heart right now.
Yeah. That's so all these three elements, they each have a chemical process as part of what they're about, right? Cheese, wine, and bread. And then there's another part of them that is the sensuality. That's a major element that's common in all of them. That's the part that, to me, well, it's all fascinating, but that comes across in this book. This sensuality of these, the intense sensuality of the experience of not only being part of making, but the actual process itself that the elements are going through, and also the sensuality of the people that are involved in making these products.
Yes. It was so inspiring meeting these creators, these artisans, producers, whatever kind of label you want to put on them. They were just the most passionate folks I've ever met, and so generous with their time and their knowledge, and just really wanting to share. And I feel like when someone is really good at something and really loves something and wants to share it with people, that's the thing, right? Because if someone's really good at something, but they like kind of keep it secretive and they're like, oh, I don't want it to, it's just totally different vibe than like, come join, taste.
Right.
And that is exactly what, these incredible people I met along this journey, that's exactly what they were like.
Mm-hmm. So it's really easy to get lost in all the basic processes. And you do a really good job of just giving us clear explanations of each of the three. And that's great. But let's see if we can hit some of the highlights and make listeners eager for more. And perhaps you can weave in, as we discuss each topic, the major differences between the artisanal type of product and the commercial type of product. And so how about if we start with you moving to London and your adventures in cheese? I couldn't agree with you more that, as you write, few things are more sensual than melted cheese. And as one key element in one of the most beloved sandwiches, a grilled cheese or toasty, as it's known in the UK, right? Cheese doesn't actually melt. You want to explain that to us?
Yeah. So, all right. So let's think about plastic. Plastic melt. So let's look at the definition of melt. That is from a solid to a liquid. If you melt plastic, it doesn't turn into a liquid. It just turns into goo. That's what cheese does too, right? Cheese doesn't turn into like a water, and that is because of what cheese is. All of the I'm gonna have been so much more eloquent in my writing than I'm like not a science teacher. But basically it does not, I'll just answer that question like in a very simplistic way. It does not melt because melting is from a solid to a liquid, and it does not turn into a liquid.
It kind of stretches in a sense, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So if you think of these coils that are really tightly wound together, it's like the coils relaxing, right? It's like what's that thing we used to play with as kids that like
silly putty?
No, in Toy Story there was a dog that was this it's like a coil that then like
Slinky.
Slinky, thank you. Yeah, it's a bit like a Slinky. So think of when you warm up that mozzarella ball, it goes from a Slinky all together, and then the Slinky falls, and those pieces don't break apart and they don't disappear to a liquid, but they stretch. They stretch.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're in London, and by the way, I don't want to say, I was jealous of so many of these wonderful experiences. But as I told you before we started, luckily, we've had the opportunity to visit some of these places that you talk about. So you got to apprentice, I'll say, at Neal's Yard Dairy. It's the temple of cheese when it comes to a retail shop in London. And I'd love for you to just give us a little bit of just of the flavor of working at Neal's Yard Dairy.
So the flavor was full, so many flavors, quite literally. It is filled with impassioned people, cheesemongers who are so geeked about cheese, and not just any cheese, but British cheese and farmhouse British cheese. So these are cheeses done the way that cheese was made historically in England, on a farm with, the animals grazing outside that farm, and then, take it into the cheese barn in many cases, and then turn the milk into cheese. And so it's not just about the final product at Neal's Yard Dairy. It's about how it gets there. It's about the relationships with the cheese producers. And so therefore, when you walk into Neal's Yard Dairy, it's not an average food market. It is like you are, as you called it, a temple very accurately. It's the cathedral of cheese. There are floor to ceiling wheels of cheese being matured. It is like you are hit with all senses. And then as soon as you step in, one of the cheesemongers, which was me, I cheesemongered there for 3 years over the Christmas holiday, which is the cheese holiday in England. As soon as you walk in the door, a cheesemonger is there with an outstretched arm and a piece of cheese at the end of a utensil, asking you to try this. Because as cheesemongers there, we were told to get cheese in the customer's mouth as fast as possible, because the only way to learn about cheese is to taste it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. And with this experience of not only working retail at this iconic place, but you also have the opportunity to work with numerous artisans who make cheese. And one of the things that struck me is that no matter whether it was cheese or whether it was wine or whether it was bread, there was a commonality in every story, and that is the fact that there was a symbiotic relationship always between at least two living entities, the maker and the product itself. They were communing with each other on a regular basis. And I am not being, we'll say, woo-woo about this. This is real. This is real, because these products are living products. They're constantly changing.
Absolutely. That you totally hit the nail on the head. And that's why I never got sick of being with these people. Any of the people that I spent time with, I could have just spent many more days, many more months, years with them, because I was learning so much from how they reacted and observed, and were just complete open books every time, whether, just like you said, whether it's cheese or wine or bread, sourdough, as much as anything, is very affected by the weather, the humidity, like absolutely everything in the environment. And that's for everything fermentation, right? And in order to make a delicious quality product with that, you need to have an antenna up and be attuned to what that is. And that requires stopping and listening, and in some cases tasting. And you have to adjust as you go. which I think is like a really, again, it's like bringing it to life. What an important life lesson. Like I'm someone who likes to go through life really quickly, and I'm, very goal oriented, very driven. I'm like, go, go, go. And throughout the process of this book, realizing, and again, to take it back to the ski accident, like that was the greatest thing I learned from that, was like by stopping and getting in touch with what our joys are, and so much more than that. But that was kind of my big takeaway from the accident. But with these artisans, they stop and they're in tuned, and then their next steps are directly affected. They're impacted by that, right? So it's not like, oh, let me listen and see what's going on. Okay, I'm just going to do what I was going to do anyway. Cool. It's like, no, our actions are affected by that moment of stopping and listening.
Mm-hmm. And I love the visceralness of some of the descriptions of the process. For example, and I don't remember which one it was, but where you were actually, along with the cheesemaker, you were taught to stick your arm, literally your arm up to your shoulder into the curds in the whey to mix and help form what that final product would eventually turn out to be. And I wonder if you could just share, for example, one of the stories that was particularly moving was the story of something that I think is unfortunately too common today, and that is how artisanal products become lost. And so this is the story of a woman named Mary Holbrook, who has passed away recently, but was just an amazing figure among not only cheesemakers, but one of the standout women. And I think we need to mention that there's a great tradition of women as cheesemakers, not only in the United Kingdom, but everywhere.
Yeah. Because, if you think about it, like on the farm, the dude was out in the fields and the woman was at home and making the cheese. The milk would come in, and it was the woman's job was making cheese. So it goes back really far. Cheese was and is in some cases a woman's game. And yeah, Mary Holbrook, the woman who you just mentioned, who I worked on her farm shortly after she passed rather suddenly from cancer. And it was a real struggle to continue making her cheeses. So this is a goat farm in Somerset called Slate Farm. Some of her goat's cheeses were just some of the most beloved cheeses that we would sell at Neal's Yard Dairy. And so I was so excited to go and live on her farmhouse and wake up at 6 a.m. every morning and, when the goats were milked, and start making cheese. And I learned so much. And maybe my biggest takeaway was less about the cheese and more about the business of cheese in that case, because as I write about after, my whole experience on the farm, her cheeses have become an extinct cheese because the farm could not continue making them. And those cheeses, they don't exist anymore because when Mary went, she essentially took her cheeses. And that is I remember talking to someone and talking about extinct cheese, and they were like, what does that even mean? And how can a cheese be extinct? I don't know if any of your listeners are readers of the New Yorker magazine, but after I finished my manuscript, there was an article about extinct cheese. And I was like, ding, ding, ding. Great. Okay. Yeah. This is getting on people's radars because it's important. And the reason it's important to acknowledge that a cheese can go away, possibly forever, unless someone like magically brings back this specific recipe. And when I say recipe for cheese, it's a fermented item, and there are a bajillion different decision-making factors that go along with it. And Mary was quite private, and she didn't really share all of those decision-making factors, which is partially why I don't know if those could ever really be replicated. But okay, the reason it's important to recognize that something like cheese can go extinct is because a lot of people think of it almost like a commodity, like block cheddar is just like, oh yeah, cheap and yummy and great. And sure, it can be that. It obviously is on many grocery store shelves, but it's also this incredible artisan product where each wheel is really different and unique from the next. And you can taste the subtleties and you can taste what, the nuances of what the animal ate and, all of these different things. And that is potentially fleeting. And I think that causes us to appreciate it. And when we appreciate what we put in our mouth, when we appreciate these things, they're more likely to stick around because we value them.
Right. You had as I said earlier, you were so fortunate. All the people that you met, it was like you were leading a charmed existence. And I know that you worked hard. It wasn't like everything just fell into your lap.
No, right? I'm like totally,
I'm
totally agreeing with you. You're probably reacting to like my hand motion. I'm like 100%, Steve. I was like, I don't even know what kind of like, what I did to like make the universe smile upon me, but I could not have planned like this entire book. I just could not have planned it as it worked out. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into when I set out to write this book. And yes, of course, hard work was a part of it, but I could not have lined up things the way that they worked out. That was pure luck.
And also connecting the dots. For example, you got an invite to become a judge at the World Cheese Awards. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it wasn't until afterwards you realized that you had produced a video. I think it might have been several years before about, by the way, one of my favorite cheeses, Rogue River Creamery, that ended up winning that year's World Cheese Award. I mean, that's almost crazy in a way.
Completely insane. Just to like give a little more context to like just how insane that is. The World Cheese Awards take place annually. Cheeses from all around the world, as World Cheese Awards would imply, cheeses from all around the world come in. There are over 3,000 cheeses up for a part of this competition. And yes, I was invited to be a judge, which was super, super awesome. I'm not that special though. There were over 300 judges because there are that many cheeses. Basically, so it's like in this huge conference room. The year that I went, it was Bergamo, Italy, so northern Italy. And you walk in this conference room and it is filled with these long tables with cheese as far as the eye can see. So one human's palate can only taste so much cheese before just your palate's just destroyed. So in order to taste the over 3,000 cheeses from around the world, they needed a whole bunch of judges. So they called in 300 judges also from around the world to taste and to judge, right? Okay. So I was put with the judges. The first round is like, they're put into groups. I was put with two guys. We're tasting the cheeses. I'm going to forget. I think we had 30 cheeses to taste on our table. Every judge had a different cheese, right? Every table were completely different cheeses. So the ones on our table, we were the only judges to taste that, right? At the end of these hours, we put a label on the one that got our most points. That is then, so our one of still many, many cheeses getting the same like gold label. That goes on to another round where all of those cheeses in that middle round, and then those are narrowed down to the final round of 8 cheeses. So this goes from like 3,500 cheeses to 8 cheeses in one day, just people tasting. And then a single cheese is chosen. And the single cheese that was chosen supreme champion of the World Cheese Awards was the one that we tasted on our table, that we put up to the next level. And then the super bonkers thing is that, because I didn't know this is essentially a blind tasting in which we don't know the producer. We don't know where it's from. We're given no information about it. Mm-hmm. When it's announced that it's Supreme Champion and that we're going, wait, that's the cheese. Wait, that's the cheese that oh my God, what are the chances? And then they say this is the first ever American cheese to win the World Cheese Awards. I'm like, whoa, it's an American cheese. I wonder where it's from. Rogue River Creamery in Oregon. And I was like, holy moly, I was there. I did a video there. And it was just, my entire world just basically exploded into like fireworks. It was the most bonkers thing.
Oh my gosh.
Like, you can't make that up. You cannot make that
up. You can't make that up. All right. I knew this was going to happen. You know, time just goes and goes so quickly. We better move on to wine right now. And I want to start with your Italian heritage. I think it's a pretty typical immigrant story. Your great-grandparents came to the States. They wanted to fit in. They never taught your grandmother their native language or kept in contact with the family in the old country. And so that's pretty typical. Now, that's kind of like a very brief background to, you know, your familial contact with Italy. But now, when it comes to wine, you go to this friend's family, and here's what you write. Nicola took me to the cellar, La Cantina, and I fell under a spell among the wooden casks and stainless steel tanks, which held various stages of fermenting grape juice. The space was warm, even with a mammoth fan blowing near the open door, and the scent of the room was subtly flora, undeniably yeasty in a different way than the cheese shop, and unexpectedly enjoyable. I wanted to stick out my tongue like I was catching a snowflake to see if I could taste anything from the air. The aroma seemed palpable. That was transporting, transforming. Thank you. So why grapes? Because any fruit can be fermented.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's true. And it was so interesting because I didn't know that before I started researching for this book. I was like, grapes aren't the only one. Grapes do have something quite magical about them, in which, well, it's not magical, it is science, but it is, they have a certain predilection that they are easily turned into alcohol, essentially. They have all of the things about them. I need to hat tip really quickly to the person who I think of as the just guru and godfather of fermentation, and that's Sandor Katz. I know I quote him when I talk about this specifically in the book, but essentially, to kind of paraphrase what Sandor said, I call him Sandor now. I don't know what Sandor Katz says is that grapes, so on grape skins, naturally in the vineyard, are native yeasts. Indigenous yeasts from the environment are on the grape skin, right? And then inside the grape, of course, is the juice, which is full of sugar. And wine grapes are different than table grapes in that they, for a couple of different reasons, but they have a higher sugar content. Sugar is, of course, necessary for making alcohol, because what happens when that yeast that's on the outside of the grape skin, when you crush the grape, that yeast seeps into the sugary liquid, and if given time to rest, okay, and we're going to go back to time, if given time, fermentation occurs and the yeast eats the sugar, and the byproducts are alcohol and carbon dioxide. And in secondary fermentation, that carbon dioxide can be captured, and that's how we get bubbly. That's how we get the Prosecco, the champagne that we have when we celebrate. So anyway, so grapes are really good at it. They've got everything you need right there.
By the way, I'm Steve Bosch, your host. This is Great Taste. We're talking to Katie Quinn, the author of Cheese, Wine, and Bread, Discovering the Magic of Fermentation in England, Italy, and France. And as you can see by the flag on her couch back there, she is Well, she happens to be in Italy, in Puglia. And we're talking about wine right now. And again, women playing a major and leading role, not only winemakers, but wine critics, sommeliers,
Yes.
every aspect of the industry itself.
Yeah,
I think it's
hugely
really important to talk about this because I don't think most people have any idea when we talk about these fantastic basic foods, wine, cheese, food, how frankly, we wouldn't have anywhere near the variety or the enjoyment if these women, these dedicated artisans, hadn't been maintaining and expanding their craft for all these years.
Totally. If the ladies didn't step up, it would be a different game. And yeah, just like we talk about with cheese, historically it was a woman's game, right? And then industrialization came in and making the process all a little bit more mechanized, more consistent. And then that's when the dudes really came in and added great things, yes. But women know what's up, man. They really know where it's at with making these products. And so wine's a similar way. And I think that in the wine section, I found that I was drawn to the female winemakers partially because I didn't set out to do that necessarily, but everywhere I turned, all the research I was doing, it was like dudes, and which is cool. I'm into that, but I felt something that I don't feel very often. I felt like conspicuously a woman in some of these tasting rooms, some of these meetings with producers, really, kind people. I just felt also, I don't know if it was somewhat cultural because I was in Italy too, but I was just like, where is the female representation? And this is a pretty male dominant arena. And I realized that the stories to be told were the ones of the people who had been challenged to be doing what they're doing, because they wake up with an extra sense of being impassioned about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So that's kind of what led me there.
Yeah. And I wish we had more time to go into some of the stories, but people can get the book and they can read the stories in the book. The one story, again, that just stood out is this charmed life that happened. You have 1 week. You pick a week. You go to participate in La Vendemmia, the harvest, and it's the Pignolo story, because you talk about timing, your timing and nature's time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, literally nature is determining. Nature is in cahoots with the winemaker. His name was Eros at Comelli Winery, where I helped with the harvest. I mean, Mother Nature determines this stuff, right? If she had decided to have a few more hot, sunny days in her that week, then I would have had to go back to London, where I was living at the time, and move on. And I would have missed La Vendemmia. As it happened, the weather forecast, which was completely accurate, by the way, was that she was going to take a cold front was coming through and rain, and maybe even hail, which is obviously could damage the grapes. And so Eros was like, okay, I would want these grapes to sit on the vine a little longer, get a little plumper, he was checking the acidity levels and the sugar levels, and was like, ideally these would have a couple more days in the sun, get a little more, a little riper. But then he saw what Mother Nature was going to do, and she was not following along with that plan. So he was like, okay, we're doing the Vendemmia tomorrow. It just happens just like that. It was like, wait a second, it's not like a date on the calendar that you plan out like 6 months in advance. No, and it can't be because it's agriculture. It's like every farmer knows like the back of their hand. And so again, watching for signs, listening, waiting, and determining, okay, tomorrow's the harvest. And it was, of course, my last day there. And thank the Lord, because doing the harvest is just the coolest experience. Getting your hands on the grapes,
Yeah. That's fantastic. All right. We got to go to bread. So here's what you write. It was early morning and the sparrows in the bush outside of my London bedroom window chattered noisily, lifting me into awareness. My first conscious thought was, it's time to bake bread. And like a gluten zombie, I moved the covers off my body and got out of bed. This had become my norm. Another day, another loaf. How did I become this person? I was never a sourdough bro type, nor did I have much of a desire to perfect the art of the flawless loaf. I've been spoiled by artisan bakeries in both Brooklyn and London, which precluded the need to buy subpar bread. Leave it to the pros was my thinking, but something had changed. I can tell you with certainty that making bread has transformed our home. Connor agrees. He's the one who made the observation in the first place. The joy of giving birth to a bundle of fresh bread is a worthy pursuit, and a joy I can't help but encourage others to try. Beautiful.
I mean, thank you. Yeah, thank you for reading that. It's cool to remember because it, as I say, it is such a part of my life now that it's fun to remember that it became that way. I was like bit by the bug, right? But yeah, dude. Okay, so I have to like give you like a little snapshot into when I wrote this book proposal, right? I was like, oh, cheese, wine, and bread. Oh yeah, that's it. I can't wait to explore this and blah, blah, blah. I did not anticipate sourdough specifically being such the focus of the bread chapter as it became. It was through a series of interviews, experiences, one of which is, I start with this scene when I begin the bread section. I got to meet Apollonia Poilâne, who is essentially the reigning queen of bread in France. And it was really talking to her and learning about the heritage of bread, because she runs the same bakery that her grandfather started around World War II, right? Then her father took it over and now she is leading the charge. So she has this sense of history and heritage at the same time going forward in today's modern world. And she has such a, they make all their bread sourdough, right? Natural fermentation, a lot of focus on the grains that become the flour that becomes the bread, right? So it was really talking to her. It was like, okay, if everyone associates bread with France, which many people do, like France best bread, and then understanding where bread came from, how it's shifted, because now Poilâne, the thing that makes them so unique is that they have not gone on the bread trend wagon of adding, added yeast, of these like rapid rise flours, of all this machinery. They keep it as simple as can be, which is flour, water, salt, and sourdough, which a sourdough starter, for those of you who don't know, is flour and water. So again, it's just like these very basic ingredients. Anyway, it was talking to her and understanding the context of the bread world, specifically in France, but it really speaks to the bread world globally as well. And again, going back to, these are people making the less easy choice for really good reasons. And that's when I was like, I need to hear their stories. Yeah. And so that's when I went down the sourdough path, and that's when I started making sourdough, and the rest is in the book.
Right. And if I had to pick out one character, there's a man who is very eccentric, and you got to work with Nicolas Supio. And I wish you'd share a little bit of that story.
Yeah. So Nicolas is in Brittany, France, in the northern part of France, and he is known. He's known as the Barefoot Baker because he quite literally bakes barefoot. He is also known as and calls himself a peasant baker. So a paysan boulanger in French. And that means that he's a farmer. And on his land, he grows grains. And then he takes those grains, he harvests the grains, and he mills them and makes flour. And then with that flour, he makes bread for himself and for his community. So he feeds his community with this bread that he makes from soup to nuts, right? I mean, this is the entire bread process in a very microscopic way. And he does it all very purposefully. He is a man of principle. And I really learned so much from him about philosophy, right? Rudolf Steiner, biodynamics, and Masanobu Fukuoka, the one straw revolution. He really is a philosopher, and his whole purpose is to, like, he saw that the way bread is made typically, each of those parts are so divorced from each other. So the baker hardly knows anything in some cases about the flour he's getting it from. He may or may not know the milling company, but he has no idea where the grains are grown, right? And the miller probably, just gets the grain shipped in. And anyway, so Nicolas is like, I will do this entire system all on my own. And he admits, he's like, it's a little nuts, but he does it on principle, really.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary as the norm. I wish I could say, I'm sure you do too, that it was the norm. But even in France, that has such a history of bread, that story has suffered a lot of, we'll say, damage over the years. And it's only now being revived by people like Nicolas and Apollonia Poilin and others. And I remember this experience. I can't remember the name of the baker now, but it was quite a while ago. I don't want to go into it. But it was bakery was on Rue Haussmann and in Paris. And I had read the story of this gentleman who was the baker. He was supposed to be this crotchety old man. He was like in his 70s at that time. And we went in there on our way to the airport before we returned to the States. And he was just as nice as could be. He was so sweet. And of course, we don't, well, not of course, we don't speak French. I mean, we know a few words, but he was totally patient with us. And we brought home a tomato tartare. Is that right? Tartare?
Yeah.
Tartare? Okay.
Yeah, good job.
That was literally, it would have been, I don't know, a day and a half old by the time we got to eat it. It was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. Wow. Thinking about artisanal bread and what it was like. And here's this guy, in his mid 70s or whatever at the time, who was just doing it all himself, just everything, the croissants, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't make sure to tell people that the most important, I want to know what you're shaking your head about, because I know that that's important, whatever it is, because what I'm going to say is totally different. And that is that what they need to make sure to do is to have a really wonderful, amazing salted French butter that they can put a huge.
Oh, yeah. I totally support that. Oh, yeah. No. Okay. Totally 100% behind that.
Okay. But now what were you shaking your head about? Tell me.
No, just everything you were saying about like the importance of sharing what these people are doing. Right. And because that's the only way to capture it, is to live it, experience it, and then share it. And I just, Yeah, obviously, I think that's important. I dedicated a few years of my life to it.
Right.
But yeah, 100% with French salted butter is like the best thing. Yes.
Right. So I love this quote because I think it kind of takes us, in a sense, full circle. And that is, it's from a man, I can't remember his last name. Baptiste is his last name?
Baptiste Chardin.
Okay. And he says, everyone has his paradox. Inconsistency in humans, inconsistency in fermentation. It's an inexplicable phenomenon that's only natural. How do you react to that?
Yeah, I totally agree. So the background behind that quote is that so he's in Toulouse, France, and in southern France, and I'm talking with him at like we're outside at a cafe over like an espresso, and he is talking to me about why he makes bread again in this natural way, no machines, just arms, natural fermentation, blah blah blah. And he is speaking with such energy and such focus. I mean, he's just like this ball of like, I almost wasn't sure when we first met. I was like, is this guy like a little unstable? I kind of can't tell. But no, he just was so passionate about what he was doing. And, all of these things that would make me think that he might go about all parts of his life in a certain way, because he was, was like so anti pesticides, very specific about the fields where he gets his grain, blah, blah, blah. And then he like whips out an e-cigarette and is like smoking an e-cigarette while he's like talking to me about all this stuff. And I'm watching him and I'm just like, in my mind, those two things don't go. Like everything he was espousing about bread, I was like, whoa. If you smoke, I would imagine you like rolling your own tobacco that like you grew this tobacco somewhere, and then you like milled your own paper and, like smoke from that. And he's smoking an e-cigarette, and I could not help but kind of point it out to him and just like, and just not judgmentally at all. Just like, I'm surprised you're talking about this and you're smoking an e-cigarette. And that's what caused him to say, we humans are a funny bunch. We're a funny bunch. And it's just so true. It's just so true.
We are a funny bunch, and we are inconsistent. And that's the story of wine, cheese, and bread also, because it's the story of fermentation. And you have told it so eloquently. And I thank you. And please, there are people who are going to actually see this, and there will be people listening to it. So hold up that bread, hold up that book, please. And there it is. Oops. Okay. And there's the front. Okay. Cheese, Wine, and Bread. Discovering the Magic of Fermentation in England, Italy, and France. Katie Quinn. You can find her on Instagram at, what is it? Is it Q Katie on Instagram?
It is Q Katie. Yep.
Okay, Q Katie, that's Q Katie, and on her YouTube channel, Q Katie, with over 300 videos and the Keep It Quirky podcast. Thank you. I can't even tell you how pleasurable this was. Thank you so much.
Steve, I had a great time. Such a pleasure. And thank you.
Mm-hmm. So we always end with 3 little words, and I'm going to expand it a little bit. So when you're eating your cheese, wine, and bread, eat with joy. This has been Great Taste. I'm Steve Boss, and you've been listening to Katie Quinn as our guest, the author of Cheese, Wine, and Bread.
Great taste. Sweet. Sour. So good to taste.